Yes and no. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Today we have a special day. Today is the Spiritist Day. It was established as being April 18th because this was the day that Allan Kardec published the Spirit's book, originally in 1858, 57. And now we make it as a day that we celebrate, all of us, Spiritists, the work, the learning, and the education that we go through every day. So congratulations to everyone who is here today. And to celebrate this, we have this special event here on Saturdays, at which we don't have anything, but today we do. And we have two very special guests who have joined us from far away. We have the honor and the pleasure of having here with us two of the directors of the International Spiritist Council, the ISC. I'll do a quick introduction to them, but I will also ask them to do a quick hello once they come up. So, first, I'd like to welcome Charles Kempf. He is the Secretary General of the International Spiritist Council. Charles has been with the Spiritist movement a long, long time, and he has done great work towards the unification of the Spiritist movement, both in his native France as well as the international space with the International Spiritist Council. Charles has been a great supporter of the Canadian Spiritist Council and the movement here, and it's really a special treat for us to have him here. Just a couple of notes. He is an engineer from the École Nationale Supérieure des Mines de Paris. He works in power plants. He's been involved with Spiritism since 1986. He leads the Centre d'études Spirit Léon Denis in Thann, France. And he also participated in the organization of the Fourth World Spiritist Congress in Paris in 2004. It was one that we didn't have the chance to go. He's the member of the Executive Committee of the International Spiritist Council since 2004, and for 2 years now, have you been the Secretary General? Yes. He's also a member of the French-speaking Spiritist Movement Coordination Entity. He has participated in a number of other activities. We'll be here forever if we wanted to list them all. But Charles is going to be speaking to us today about the unification of Spiritist groups. Talk about the principles and the basis of why do we work together. It's a fundamental, basic concept that Allan Kardec himself spent a lot of time in his final years of his life traveling and sending exactly the same kind of message. And we still need to remind ourselves, why do we do this? Why do we work together? And why is it so important for all the Spiritists to come together in the same energy, the same vibration? And no day is this more important or more relevant than today, being the International Spiritist Day. We also have the pleasure of having Jean-Paul Efrad here with us. Jean-Paul comes from Belgium, and he is the president of the French-speaking Spiritist movement, the Mouvement Spirit Francophone, and pardon my French. He's also president of the Spiritist Union from Belgium. He's also the president of, he's got a lot of work in his hands, president of the Spiritist Federation of the Liège, the province of Liège, where he lives. He's also a member of the executive committee of the International Spiritist Council. He has organized a number of congress around spiritism and medicine, especially under the Francophone activities. And he is also responsible for organizing an annual symposium for the Francophones. So I won't extend much because we are really here to hear what Charles has to tell us. But I would invite Jean-Paul to come here and give us an initial prayer to get our work started. Thank you very much for everyone for being here. Yes, it's going to be in French, but we'll all understand it perfectly. Thank you.
speak French. It's a pleasure for me to be here. But in vibration, there is no language. It's a universal language. Dieu notre Père, nous sommes tous ici réunis en ton nom, venant de différentes régions, de différents pays, parlant de différentes langues terrestres, mais parlant de la même langue spirituelle, qui est l'amour et la charité. Aide-nous, ainsi que nos guides, à œuvrer pour le bien, l'union et la divulgation de cette belle philosophie. Il existe encore beaucoup de barrières matérielles qui nous empêchent d'œuvrer efficacement. Mais nous savons que grâce à toutes ces personnes de bonne volonté qui sont ici et ailleurs, nous pourrons vaincre toutes les étapes, toutes les difficultés qui seront placées sur notre route, car nous savons que tu es le chemin, la vie et le but à atteindre. Aide-nous chaque jour à devenir meilleurs, à vaincre nos défauts, à reconnaître en l'autre une sœur, un frère, car tu es notre Père à tous. Quoi que nous fassions, quoi que nous soyons, où que nous soyons sur notre chemin, nous savons qu'un jour, nous serons appelés à nous réunir en ton nom et nous retrouver dans ta plénitude lorsque nous aurons réussi à vaincre toutes les barrières de la matière qui nous empêchent encore à l'heure actuelle d'être pleinement avec toi. Ainsi soit-il.
Thank you, Jean-Paul. Thank you, José. Thanks to all of you for the opportunity to allow me to talk to you a little bit today. I would like to apologize. I'm French, so my English is not Canadian English or American English or Oxford English. It's English that I call NVG English. You know what it is? Not very good English. Even so, I hope you will understand me. This NVG English is the one that is spoken everywhere and in fact allowing the humans to communicate between themselves, in particular in Europe. Here in North America, you are lucky, you have only 2 or maybe 3 languages with the Spanish of Mexico or Miami. But in Europe, we have 34 languages. So out of the English, it's very difficult. And Esperanto is a nice wish, but in the reality, it's today still a little bit behind the English to communicate. So I will try to use this NVG English. So if I tell really something wrong, Jose, please you interrupt me and correct me. The essential being that you can understand.
I understand.
What I will try to what I will try to communicate to you. Okay. So I will talk to you today about the basis and principles of unification in the Spiritist movement or of Spiritist groups. This is something which is quite new, this notion of unification, and I will try to go through it and to try to make you understand it, because a lot of times unification is mixed or understood to be the same as uniformization, which is not at all the case. We are all different, and this is the beauty of nature, because we are different. We are woman and male or female. We are of different cultures, different origin, from Portugal, from Belgium, from France, from Brazil, from Canada. And this is what makes our world, the richness of our world, this big diversity. But it's also, let's say, a challenge that we have to overcome, because a lot of time we do not understand ourselves very well, because the way we understand the things is not the same in each culture. So I will try to go a little bit through all these questions in these lectures. I will start with a short introduction, then talk about this basis of unification of Spiritist groups. Then I will talk to you about the boss of Spiritism. So the one who don't know, Kardec wrote some text about that is published in the posthumous works. I'm not sure if this is translated into English already.
They started to.
Started to, okay.
Yes.
You will see it's very, very good, excellent. How Kardec, advised us to organize and to lead the Spiritist movement. Then I will talk about cultural aspects in order to end with a conclusion. And then I think if we have, I hope to have enough time so that you can have we can have a question and answer session. Okay. So first, a few words about the International Spiritist Council. It has been founded in 1992, so it's still a young entity with only 23 years old. It's a little bit already out of the youth or adolescence in English.
Yeah, we understand. Yeah.
Adolescence, yeah. And started with 9 members, and today it has 24 countries members. The International Spiritist Council is gathering basically the national unions or federations of different countries where they exist. And this you can see on this map. The countries in blue have already a Spiritist Federation, National Spiritist Federation, that is a member already of the International Spiritist Council. So this International Spiritist Council is controlled. The decision makers are the assemblies of these 24 members. Then we have also some contacts in other countries where there is no federation yet, or where the federation is not yet member. So you can see them in green. You see that from the members, most of America is already in the council, most of Western Europe as well. But you see that it's extending now a little bit towards East Europe, starting in Africa, Angola and Mozambique, and also in Oceania, where we have Australia, New Zealand, and Japan, where there are several Spiritist groups. There are, of course, a lot of other countries where some Spiritists exist. I learned even that there is a group in Doha now, in Qatar. And slowly but surely, the movement is developing throughout the world. Another important point in the Spiritist movement is that the hierarchy does not work as we are used to. When you are at your work or in the government or in an administration or even in the traditional religious organizations, you have a hierarchical structure where you have the boss, which is dictating what the others below him have to do or have to believe, etc. So it's a vertical hierarchical organization. In Spiritist movement, we are trying to change this model to put an horizontal organization. Means these 24 members that you have seen, you have Brazil, of course, is a member. So you have 4 million Spiritists and tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of Spiritist groups in Brazil. And then you have smaller countries like El Salvador, where there are 3 or 4 groups with much less people. But Brazil has a vote and El Salvador has a vote. You see, already to make no difference, that we don't have one culture or one country imposing the decisions on top of the other ones. Even UN or so, you see, there are countries which have a veto right, others not, and so on. Of course, we don't want to discuss that, but in the Spiritist movement, we decided to make it horizontal. And the second thing is, the more you rise in the Spiritist organization, the more you have the duty to serve and to help the people. It's not to dictate, it's to help. And this is following the example given by Jesus when he was washing the feet of the apostles, and he was telling, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. So we are not here to impose anything to you, we are just here to help. We bring the teachings, we bring you what we have, we discuss together, we see how we can help you to fix the problem, but we are not here at all to tell you that you have to do this or that or this way or that way. Okay? And this is what we try to apply in the Spiritist movement as a whole, and which is also followed by the national federations as far as possible, of course. What are the International Spiritist Council objectives? You can see main purpose to promote fraternal union among the Spiritist institutions of all countries and the unification of the international Spiritism movement. So you see this word is already in the bylaws because this is an excerpt of the bylaws of the entity. Then to promote the study and dissemination of the Spiritists in these three basic aspects, scientific, philosophical and religious. And third, to promote the practice of spiritual, moral and material charity according to the Spiritist teachings. So you see, it's to promote fraternity, union, to study, but not only to study, also to put in practice. Okay? So the basis of the International Spiritist Council are the Spiritist teachings, mainly codified by Allan Kardec, as José just mentioned, the Spirit's book, which is today 158 years old. But the other 4 I will talk about this tomorrow, for those who I will have the pleasure to meet again tomorrow. So this is really the basis of the teaching, which is at the root of this unification of gathering the federation and also the people. And second, to place, no, it's Allan Kardec, but not only Allan Kardec. There are also other works following its guideline and who became complementary and subsidiary to the codification. So as example, you have Léon Denis, you have Gabriel Delanne, but you have also Francisco Xavier, you have Divaldo Pereira Franco, you have a lot of other authors throughout the world which wrote complements to the Kardec's book, but which stay in line with all these teachings. Okay? And second objective is to place the Spiritist teaching to their extent to the service of all mankind. So you have seen the map before. We have the Spirit's book now translated into 17 languages. But I told you that only in Europe we have 34. And in the world it's how much? 100 and something like 200 languages. So we have the 17th out of 200. So we still have 183 to go, including Chinese, including Arabic. No, Arabic we have already. It's not a very well translation, but there is one that you can make download, by the way, from the website of the French Spiritism movement, lmsf.org. You can have this book for free download, the Spirit's book in Arabic. But we have a huge work to do to realize the second objective here. And this is really one of the biggest challenges of the International Spiritist Council, which needs a lot of collaboration, a lot of unification to get there, as you will see. Also, any and all programs supporting material offered by IAC are not of mandatory use. It's left to the discretion of the national and local organizations, the decision to adopt them or not, partially or entirely, or to adapt them according to their own needs and conveniences, as I just also explained you. And this is written in the bylaws of the International Spiritist Council. Let's now enter in the subject of this, what is the basis of the unification of the Spiritist group? What does this unification word mean? So, first, citation. Citation? I was about to excerpt. Citation is better. Huh? A citation of the Gospel according to Spiritism. So it's a communication given by the Spirit of Truth. And he was clearly telling Spiritists, love one another. That is the first precept. Educate yourself is the second. So it was, you see here, the call, love one another. I mean, it's the duty that Jesus told us already 2,000 years ago, that we have to love our neighbor. And he was telling this even stronger for the Spiritists. And continuing from the same spirit in the item number 8, take these two words for your motto, devotion and abnegation, and you will be strong as they resume all the obligations that charity and humility impose. Because without charity and without humility, it's very difficult to work together. What is charity? There is a definition of charity in the Spirit's book. I don't remember exactly the question. It's 900 and something. It's in French or in Portuguese. I tell always it's BIP or BIP, 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 so that you have on the phone or wherever. So B is for benevolence. Is correct in English? I is for indulgence towards the imperfection of the others. And P, that does not work in English, sorry, is forgiveness of what we suffered from the others. And how can we work together if we do not have indulgence towards the imperfection of the others? We are here on the earth. You can see that the earth is not really the house of a house of angels. We are all imperfect, and if we do not forgive our imperfections one towards the other, how can we work together? It's not possible. And this is really the basis which is needed. It looks obvious, but it's a little bit more difficult to do, and it needs a lot of work and inner reform and what is written there, the humility, in order to get there. But it's really the path that will make us successful in our aim, which is to disseminate Spiritism and to make this teaching at the disposition of the humanity in order to have the progress of the human being. So continuing with the spirit of truth, in truth I say unto you that those who bear their burdens and help their brothers and sisters are beloved by me. Instruct yourselves in this precious doctrine, which dissipates the error of revolt and shows the sublime objectives of human trials. Okay. Continuing, the time approaches when those things that have been announced for the transformation of humanity will be accomplished. All those who have worked in the field of the Lord with disinterestedness and no other motives than charity will be blessed. Their working days will be paid 100 times more than was expected. Of course, it's one word which is very important here is disinterestedness. We are not working for us. We are working for the others, to disseminate these teachings that helped us in our life, so that the people who benefit of it can also get help for the problems in their life. So this shall be the first aim. But if we do that really with disinterestedness, at the end, we will also have a benefit. And in the spiritual world, basically, the accountability works the opposite. The more we give, the richer we are. Blessed are those who have said to their fellow beings, let us work together and unite our efforts, so that when the Lord arrives, he will find his works finished. Then the Lord will say to them, come to me, come unto me, you have been good servants, you who know how to silence your rivalries and discords, so that no harm should come to the work. It's also a warning, and I must tell, it's not what we see in the Spiritist movement. Wherever you are in the world, there are always some personal problems here and there. But it's really what we should keep in mind in the work when we are starting to be leaders in the Spiritist movement. Continuing with Allan Kardec, so tolerance being the fruit of charity is the base of the Spiritist teachings. It imposes a duty to respect all beliefs, So if I'm correct, everyone will end up thinking like me, and if I'm wrong, then I will end up thinking like the others. They're also from Kardec. Huh? So it just, let's go ahead. Maybe Spiritism is wrong. Maybe it's not out of Spiritism there is no salvation. There are a lot of other teachings, and I always tell what's important is to practice the charity. So an atheist which is practicing charity is better than a Spiritist who does nothing. Huh? That's clear. And Kardec, with regard to the teaching, he was very clear. Okay, maybe we are wrong, but then if tomorrow somebody is explaining us where we are wrong, we will adapt to it and correct. And this is also the progressive character of the Spiritist teachings. They are not cast in concrete. It did not happen since these 158 years so much to find something wrong in the Spiritist teachings, because basically they came through mediumship. The spirits have inspired these teachings through the mediums, and they had, of course, much wider vision that we have and brought these teachings in a very, let's say, organized and high-level way. So the teachings really are strong, but even so, we have to have the humility to recognize that they are not the only ones in the world. 10 people united by a common thought are stronger than 100 that do not understand each other. It's also an evidence, isn't it? And this is also why Kardec wrote that it's better to have 10 small groups which have a very good connection between the members or the workers than to have a big one where there are people which are not in harmony. And this is, I told to Joe, Toronto, 4 million people. Well, there should be 10 or 20 or 30 Spiritist groups. That would be really very good for a city like that, with different tendencies. The one more on the religious aspect, the other ones more on philosophical, the other ones more on religious. And it's the gathering of all them that will bring the strength of the movement. Spiritism also is a question of depth. To be bound by the form would be a folly, unworthy of the magnitude of the subject. Therefore, those centers which are faithful to true Spiritism ought to join hands fraternally and unite to combat their common enemies, that are incredulity and fanaticism. Fanaticism or fanatism? Fanaticism. Okay. So now from Paul of Tarsus, Paul wrote the following in one of his letters: where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is also liberty. And the liberty is one of the fundamental teaching of Spiritism, isn't it? And this is also why we are generally non-profit organizations. I think you have the same here. And the people, they come here according to their liberty. They come according to their free will. So we just have to propose what the people are looking so that they stay with us. If we propose something different, or they will just leave, isn't it? And it is something that we need really to strengthen, because I don't know here, but in France we have some difficulties of sects, yes, and a lot of times Spiritism is called or named to be a sect by some people who don't know exactly what Spiritism is. And the best answer you can tell to the people that Spiritism is not a sect is this one, the law of liberty. Here the people are free. They come when they want and they go when they want. Mm-hmm. And this is also something fundamental of the teachings that we have to follow. And you see, it comes from Paul.
Promises either.
Sorry?
We make no promises.
Exactly. No promises of immediate solution of any problem. And there are some other aspects you will see later. For if the trumpet give an uncertain sound, who shall prepare himself for the battle? Still from Paul. So we have to talk to the people in a clear manner. You will see that this is not always very easy, because a lot of people, they come to Spiritism, they make some spiritualist shopping, isn't it? They go a little bit to Buddhist or to wherever and so on. It's also natural and according to the free will. But as spiritists, we have to be clear. If we do not give a clear message to the people, how will the people understand what we are talking about? Huh? Now I put some excerpts or citations from a message called Unification, which has been given by the spirit of Bezerra de Menezes, maybe you know him, through the mediumship of Francisco Cândido Xavier in the 60s. And this Bezerra de Menezes is really helping a lot the Spiritist movement throughout the world. He is probably present also here when you have national meetings or big events or things like that. And he really, in his messages, developed a lot this notion of unification that has been already talked about by Kardec. So he was writing at the beginning of the message the following: the work of unification in our ranks is urgent but not rushed. One assertion seems to contradict the other, but it is not so. It's urgent because it defines the goal that we should aim at, but not rushed because it's not granted to us to violate anyone's conscience. I think it's clear. Huh? Sorry. Let's preserve the purpose of uniting, approaching, and understanding one another. Wherever possible, let's also establish the works of Kardec according to the light of Christ of God in every place where the name of Spiritism has been brought to enlighten even the smallest study group. The Spiritist teachings hold their essential aspects in a triple configuration, as we saw at the beginning. Thus, no one should be restricted in their desire to work and produce. Let those inclined towards the science cultivate them in all their dignity. Those who devote themselves to philosophy ennoble their these postulates, and those who consecrate themselves to religion to turn its aspirations towards divinity. Yet, above all, it's necessary that the basis of the Spiritist teaching remain in everyone and everything, so that we do not lose balance at the base over which the organization is raised. So it happens a lot of times that in France, for instance, we have some Spiritist groups which are making researches, scientific researches about mediumship or about instrumental transcommunication. Is that correct? Or other type of phenomenology. Okay, they are developing the science. Others are more linked to the religious, to do charity, to make soup or food for the homeless people and so on. And others are more developing the philosophical aspect of notion of God and purpose of living, etc. So all this is Spiritism. It's simply some prefer one, the other one prefers the second one, and the third one prefers the third one. And it's also a question of free will to let all these people, according to their preference, select what they want to do better. But we should avoid this, one to criticize the other. Yeah, but these are things of bondieuserie in French. I don't know how to tell that in English. People a little bit naive, religious or whatever, huh? And the other one, well, they do only science and so on. So this is to be avoided. One should not criticize the other because, as I told at the beginning, it's the joining of all three which gives the richness of the Spiritism and also of the Spiritist groups and movement. So no hostility, no disregard towards anyone, necessity to preserve the principles, to honor and to exalt them, or we will end up as strangers to one another or frozen in regimentations. This will cripple our best yearnings, turning the movement of liberation into a stagnant sect, imprisoned in new interpretations and theologies, which would place us conveniently at the mercy of the inferior planes and distance us from the truth. So there is a need of some dynamics in all this. Huh? Continuing, sorry. He's also insisting that we should follow Kardec in the studies, aspiration, activities, and deeds, so that our faith does not turn into hypnosis, whereby the power of darkness can establish its influence over the weaker minds, enchaining them to centuries of illusions and suffering. So this is also an important point, because when you are developing a group or leading an activity and so on, you know that there is always some spiritual opposition. There is some help, but there is also some opposition. So it needs a lot of protection, a lot of attention. We have really to be careful to maintain also within the group and even ourselves this the prayers and all what is necessary in order to protect us, and to avoid that we open the door to perturbation, which unfortunately happens a lot in the Spiritist movement, some groups being completely deviating from the initial purpose. But if we stay with Allan Kardec, there we have something solid which gives us the basis for avoiding this. Alors, Allan Kardec work not only believed and felt, proclaimed and manifest in our convictions, but also sufficiently lived, suffered, wept over, and put into practice in our own life. So it's again what I told at the beginning. Theory is one thing, but the practice is another one. And in countries like Canada, I would even say Anglo-Saxonic or even Germany, for instance, if you tell something and you behave differently of what you tell, you lose immediately your credibility. It's really the Latin are maybe a little bit more tolerant to that. Huh? Do what I tell, but don't do what I do. Huh? So, well, maybe not. I think it's important everywhere, but in particular in countries like Canada, I'm sure if you do not behave like you tell. So this is also a fundamental point that Bezerra recalled us in his message. So you see again. So here again is coming back on the we have to be let's say consistent in our message, to follow, maintain as it was given by Allan Kardec, without political compromises. So a lot of times Spiritist groups, they go to the government in order to try to get some subsidies, for instance, to pay a rental or whatever. So this is okay as far as the government doesn't come and impose us to do something else than our purpose. So we have really to avoid the political compromises of this type, because it would make us deviate immediately from our purpose. Without religious professionalism. So this is really clear also. What we receive for free, we have to give it for free. And we have to avoid all these mistakes done over the centuries by the traditional religions who were basically selling indulgences or prayers or whatever. And this is absolutely to be avoided, without degrading personalism. That is, I think, one of the biggest enemy of the Spiritist movement is the too strong personality of some leaders. And it's really to be avoided. You see, for instance, Chico Xavier as a medium. He was humble all the time. And this is what made his big success and made such that he is recognized as being a really very good person, even out of the Spiritist movement. And if we have personalism, or personalism means somebody who wants to impose his way of doing and of seeing the things, it starts immediately dividing the movement. The people who do not agree, since it's a non-profit, we don't live from that. Okay, I don't like it, so I go to see somewhere else if it's better. So it's really something that one of the biggest enemy of the Spiritist movement, and we have really to be careful when we are raising again in the hierarchy to make all what we can to avoid this. respect for all creatures, regard for all authorities, devotion of the common good, as well as instruction for people in every directions about the truth of the spirits that are unalterable and eternal truths. So no need to comment. Nothing that is reminiscent of caste discrimination, unjustifiable individual prominence, privileges, immunities, or priorities. Looks obvious, but again, we have really to be careful on that. As I told you, you see El Salvador 1 vote, Brazil 1 vote. So we are trying by this to follow this type of advices. In each temple, the strongest should be a shield for the weakest, the most enlightened a light for the least knowledgeable. The sufferers must always be the most protected and the most helped. Amongst those who suffer less, the greatest will be the one who puts himself at the service of the others, as I told at the beginning, according to the words of the divine mentor. So this is also the practice even inside of the Spiritist movement, not only outside. Let's remember the words in the word of Jesus that if a house is divided against itself, that house cannot stand or will collapse. Whereas no one can tear apart a bundle of twigs joined together in a union of forces. Is it clear, this bundle of twigs? So a twig you can, but then take a bundle of twigs and try to break it. We are all individuals, a small twig. So if the enemy, incarnated or spiritual, comes, he will break us. But if we are united together, he will not manage to break us so easily. Unification indeed, union as well. It's indispensable that we become unified under the Spiritist ideal, but above all, we unite as brothers and sisters, because we are all sons of the same Father, which is God. We have all been created by God, correct? So we are all brothers. And Jesus told it very clearly. These are my brothers and sisters looking to the population at that time. The task of unification is gradual, whereas the task of uniting is immediate. The work is incessant because we will never complete the task, since we are imperfect servants and perform only the portion that it is entrusted to us. So we really have to accept that. I always tell, did you see No Solar movie?
Yeah.
Everybody? So the best example is André Louis when he arrives in this kind of hospital and try to, I'm the doctor or whatever, and then the small servant told, okay, take a broom and start. So we have to accept to do our part and to be humble in this work, and only then to rise and to make the other tasks depending of our own progress. Let's join hands, be helpful one to another. Let's forget conflicting opinions to remember the concept of identification, trusting in time that is a great dryer of tears and corrects everything. One thing interesting, I was in year 2000 in New York at the UN organized the Millennium Summit for Peace. And they joined 300 different religious leaders. And it was interesting because we had Spiritists, of course. There was Divaldo, Nestor Mazzotti, and a lot of myself and other people from the Spiritist movement. But there were also Buddhists, there were Hindus, there were Catholic, Orthodox, 300. So it's really interesting to see. And they managed to draw a commitment of about 10 points that has been signed by 298 out of these 300 representatives. And the only one who did not sign is, I don't know, the Chinese, because the Buddhists signed, or for political or other reasons. And in this commitment, it was they put really some fundamental things like education of children, protection of nature, stop violence, reduce number of arms in the world, and so on. So all the 300 are in agreement on this basis. Now take the religions in the world. What's happening? The people, they focused on some conflicting opinions. One is making a prayer like this, the other one is making a prayer like that. One has a white uniform, the other one has a black one, and so on. Jesus never told that we should do churches. He never told that we should have a pope. He never told that that the priest cannot marry or whatever. All these things have been brought by the man later on. But on the basic principle, everybody agrees. And basically, it's the same in the Spiritist movement. Our basis is Kardec. Okay, do we agree on Kardec? Yes, everybody will tell you. And then they start, we should do like that, no, we should do like that. This is exactly what we have to avoid. Because at the end, we have all the same goal, isn't it? So that's for this basics of mainly from Bezerra de Menezes. Now I will talk a little bit more about the boss of Spiritism, according to this posthumous work from Allan Kardec. So it was called Project 1868, and he wrote an article that was entitled The Spiritist Constitution. And he rose the following question, as you can see. Who will be in charge to maintain Spiritism on its track? Who will have enough time and the needed perseverance to dedicate themselves or himself to the continuous work demanded by this task? He felt it himself, because at a certain moment there were so many people writing to him and so on, so you can answer, I don't know, to 20 or 30 emails per day, but 200 you cannot answer anymore. At that time it was even not emails, it was with a candle, there was no light, there was no computer, no copy-paste, nothing. So at a certain given point in time, one person cannot do everything anymore. So he was asking, okay, how he was leading the Spiritist movement during his presence on the earth until 1869, but you see, it was just 1 year before he died. Then he asked, how will it continue? And he was then thinking about that, of course, with the inspiration of the spirits, and he left us the teachings that I will show now. So such direction of the movement is not only necessary, but it requires also sufficient strength and stability to resist all the storms. Storms, again, government making us problem, other religions making us problem, incarnated bad people making us problem, selfishness within the group, spirits who come and start perturbating, making perturbation in a group. So many things can happen, and I think you can see it daily or almost. How can we resist to all this pressure? So one person is definitively not possible anymore. So then he continued, let's suppose that one person has all the needed skills to conduct such a mission, and that they become the leader. This person becomes a leader. The successor may not have the same skills and can change the direction of the work. So one is doing like that, the other like that, and then of course you do not progress a lot. And one is doing, the other one undoing and doing again. Like this you cannot progress. Even without bad intentions, they can have different point of view, more or less correct. If they want to impose their own ideas, they may divert from the teachings, generating divisions, and these same difficulties can appear with each change. Makes sense. I like this simple reasoning of Kardec because it's... So this is the difficulty of the individual direction. And then Kardec told we should rather go for a collective direction. And he was telling greater authority and strength, better resistance against contrary opponents, stronger stability, etc., even in case one team member is failing or missing. So he told the Spiritist movement should not be led by one person. It should be led by a group of persons. And he was even telling between 6 to 12 or something like that. So this avoids the inconvenience we have seen before about the individual direction. So it's something that we are trying to do in the International Spiritist Council, which is basically led the members are deciding, and then the execution in the daily work is done by the executive committee, which is composed of 12 members, to which Jean-Paul and myself are belonging. But there are 10 others, so from Guatemala, Portugal, Spain, 2 from Brazil, Uruguay, 1 from Colombia, 1 from the United States. Oh, there are 12. So you see, and those 12 are trying to do this type of work. So it's also not so easy, because you see, we are all reincarnation of bishop or whatever, and used to dictate the things. And then you take a Belgian, a French, and a Guatemaltec, and a Brazilian, put the guys together to try to understand themselves and make decisions. I let you imagine the challenge. But it's the right pathway we should follow. Because at the end, we see now with something like 10 years experience, it works. It's not yet perfect. Thanks God we have internet, we have Skype, we have whatever, because we could not have the people sitting together in the same room, at least physically, every month. That's not possible. But we, through the virtual means, now we really start able to work efficiently in this way. So this is also something that you could apply in the countries, or even in the groups. A group, it's better when there is a lead of a committee leading than one person only. For the same reason as Kardec wrote in this paragraph. Voilà. It's also giving this worldwide extension. So you have of course, the vision of the Brazilian and of the Guatemaltec and the Belgian and whatever is not the same. But at the end, the decision they take together is generally the best to suit everybody. So there are some necessary conditions, and Kardec warned, these people shall have the common goals and agreement on the key point of the Spiritist teachings, so they shall be Spiritists. Otherwise, if they do not have the same direction, that will make the work very difficult. So this is, it's of course much longer, but it's very interesting to read it, and it's something that is very difficult to put in practice, but slowly but surely we are getting there and really seeing all these advantages. And when we look to the history of the Spiritist movement, in particular in France, what happened in fact after Kardec, most of the problems we had was because these advices were not followed. You have, for instance, one of the first leaders after Kardec was Pierre Gaëtan Lemarie. So he was a strong personality, and he was basically deciding the things himself. So what happened? He was leading during, for instance, 20 years, then he died. And then what happened? It was his family continuing leading, but his family or his son was not Spiritist, you see? And then, it got lost. This would have been avoided with a collective direction as advised by Kardec, isn't it? And then later on came Jean Meyer, so he made a good work. After him came another guy, which also had this inconvenience. He was somehow centralizing, even, we have to tell, it was a difficult period because of the Second World War and so on. But again, everything was lost. Jean-Paul in the Belgian Spiritist unit, they had a much stronger and better approach because they have a place where they gather, a house, and they have since 1925, all the archives, everything. But in France, everything got lost 3 times. You see? And all these types of things happened because we did not follow these advices from Kardec. In Brazil as well, it worked quite better. The Brazilian Spiritist Federation has a kind of operating mode like this. Not 100%, but quite reasonably. And if we, here in Canada, you are starting, so try to really do what you can to take these things into consideration. Of course, then in Canada, if you take, I need now 12 really very good people it's maybe difficult to find. Okay, let's then start with only 6. You see? And this is really what we have to try to do wherever. And even that we have seen recently in France. There are some other precautions to be taken. And basically in France we failed because of this recently. Okay. But it's really something very strong, and if we follow it, I'm sure with the inspiration Kardec had, that came also through his own observations and through the spirits, it's really something that will help us in progressing and making Spiritists known in our countries and in the world. So now I will come a little bit onto cultural aspects. It will be a little bit less painful than all these big teachings and so on. At least I will try. As I told you, there is a huge diversity of cultures in the world. So I found a very simple way to illustrate this, and it is thanks to... No, sorry, before I start with that, this is from Emmanuel through Chico Xavier, and he told in a communication, "Dear Jesus, make us understand for mercy's sake that God does not create us through a system of mass production, as in a car factory or whatever. And for this reason, each of us sees life and the processes of evolution in a different way. Even sometimes within the family or husband and wife, we never have, it's very seldom to have exactly the same view on everything, isn't it? And this is something fundamental that we have to understand in the same country, but then when you start in different countries, different languages and different cultures, it's even more a challenge. So to illustrate this a little bit better, I took this illustration from Yang Liu. It was a Chinese artist living in Germany since 1990. So after 10 years, she got very well aware about the German culture. And since she was Chinese, she had also a very good knowledge of the Chinese culture. And she made some very simple images, as you will see, where she tries to illustrate the cultural differences between Germans and Chinese. Okay? So let's go to it. The first one, she made an image trying to illustrate how a German and a Chinese are making their mind or are making an opinion or making their mind on something. And here is the image. So you see on the left part, the blue one is the German way and the red part is the Chinese way.
It's just like men and women.
Maybe. Okay, it's funny, but it's real. It's real. Now imagine a Chinese, which is used to this one, trying to explain something about Spiritism to a German. Or a German trying to explain the same to the Chinese. It will be very difficult, isn't it? So, sorry? Painful. So here you have the German, but I think here you can put also the Scandinavian or Anglo-Saxonic rather on this way. I think the Canadians or the Americans or the Germans that I know a little bit better because I'm born almost in Germany, in the eastern part of France. And on the other side, here you see it's more a Latin way to see. I see maybe a little bit Brazilian or a little bit more in the red part, isn't it? Enrolado.
At the Brazilian, you would have a stop at the beach, and then another stop at the restaurant, and then you come back and have a man. And then
So-
you start thinking,
Yeah, I need to add a few extra lines in there.
Voilà. But okay, but again, this one will have a better view. He will know the things around, and this one will really, like a horse, see only what is the path he followed, isn't it? So one is not better than the other. It's just different. And this is you have to take into account when you explain something to a German. Straight to the point. Don't try to blah 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 blah. It will not work. He will simply not understand you. What does this guy want to tell me? He will not understand. As simple as that. So it's something that you have to be aware of. Otherwise, how will you talk to the native people of this country? It's something that we have really to be. If we don't take this type of precautions, it will be very difficult to disseminate Spiritism here. And then you put a Chinese and a German, for instance, to work together in an organization with daily contact. If they don't know that, they will have difficulty. One has to know how the other is in order that they can understand themselves better. So there are some other ones. So how a Chinese and a German are facing a problem. Okay, ready? Let's go.
That's the Brazilian way. That's the Brazilian way, yeah.
Both are getting, you see, from the lower part to the upper part, but in a different way, isn't it? Next one. How do they see a boss? So this is again important. How do they see a boss in the Spiritist movement? How do they see the leader and the boss, as we talked before with Kardec? You see that the Chinese, what the boss tells the guy, they go and do it. In German, no. The boss has to convince the people to do something. On one side here, you have maybe a little bit more discipline, and here a little bit less. So it's always pros and cons. Again, one is not better than the other. It's also a different way. So if you want, let's say, to be a boss in Germany, it will be, you need more to convince the people to follow you. And this is even much more true in a non-profit organization, as it is the case for Spiritist movement. Punctuality. So you see Joe, isn't it? And then maybe Sandra. No, wait, 10 minutes more, isn't it? We have seen the example today.
There you go.
And here I can tell you a small anecdote. I think we have time still. No? It was in Valencia. In Valencia, there was a Finnish guy called Pekka. He's married with a Brazilian lady, and he's Finnish, really the Finnish guy, born in the middle of Finland. And he had an appointment with a guy who worked for the International Spiritist Council at that time, who was an Argentinian guy. And then they made an appointment. Okay, 7 o'clock at that place. So I was observing, you see, a little bit from far away, because then Pekka, 5 minutes before, he was not at the place, but he was very close to it, waiting. And then when it got time, he was at the place, and then he started to be concerned. And after 10, 15, half an hour, where is the other guy? And so I went there and to talk to him and tell, okay, keep calm, don't worry. The guy is an Argentinian, so he may not be so punctual as you, you know. It's not this consideration to you see, because and he was already, yeah, he's neglecting me, he doesn't like me. You see, the reaction was, it could have given a huge problem,
and
you
he's
see.
such a sweet man.
Voilà.
You know,
Yeah. But his culture, you see,
Yes.
if you come 10 minutes late, he interprets, you do not consider him, you see, and then you see, with some spirits coming and putting a little bit lenha no fogo, how do you tell that in English? You get a problem which can take years to be solved. Now we are laughing, but it's sometimes very serious. We put next one, the queue. I think this one is also no need to make a lot of comments. But where was it? In I think it was in Brazil. You see, when you have these big events with 500 people gathering, you always have a little bit confusion during the lunch and whatever. And okay, we must behave according to what we are telling, isn't it? So, but this is sometimes also very difficult for the people which are used to do it a little bit differently. Okay, so I come to the conclusion. So I think it will less time for you to ask some questions so that we can have exchanges. Unshakable faith is only that which can meet reason face to face in every human epoch. So this is a citation from that Kardec put on the cover sheet of the Gospel according to Spiritism. I think you know it. And this is really something very strong he brought in the Spiritism. It means this movement and change from blind faith to reasoned faith. The blind faith, we still can see today how this is painful in the world. Fanatism, integrism, or whatever. Blind faith, fanatism, you have no reasoning anymore. And Kardec told clearly, no, we have faith in something and much stronger when we understood it through our own reasoning. So that's why the Spiritist teachings, Spiritism is just proposing some teachings. It's not imposing anything. And we should not impose anything to anybody. We just, okay, these are the teachings, now read them. I can help you to try to understand them, and then you will make your mind. Okay? This picture I took myself. It was in 2010. Do you know where it is?
Brazilian Congress?
Brasilia.
It was not the Congress, it was o Senado. Senate. So you see, and here you have the son of Chico Xavier, you have Nestor Mazzotti, you have the president of the Congress, you have some deputies and some senators which were gathered that day to make hommage. Homenage, a tribute, yes, to Chico Xavier in the Brazilian Senate. And 2 weeks before, you had the same in the Congress. Okay. So when I saw that, and we were invited because we were there for a Congress that was organized in Brazil in 2010 for that. And so, poor French guy in Brazil invited to the Senate for a tribute to Chico Xavier. How can that be? So I told to Nestor Mazzotti at that time, Nestor, how do you manage to get that? And he, in his way, as the usual way, he always told, you know, Charles, sometimes the things are going much quicker than we expect initially. So it's really something that I hope will happen one day in the Palais du Luxembourg in Paris, or where is it here in Canada?
In the parliament.
In the Parliament of Canada, in Ottawa or wherever. We have to, this happened, and we saw it again, a second time, in 2013, in a country which has the second biggest number of Spiritist groups in the world after Brazil. And you know which country is that? The one who knows, please. Voilà. Cuba. In Cuba, you have 730 or whatever Spiritist groups registered by the government, which is making a clear difference between Spiritist groups and Santeria or other tendencies from there. There are 700 genuine Spiritist groups. Unbelievable, isn't it? And in that Congress participated people from the Presidency of the Republic, participated the Minister of the Religions, the Minister of Inner Affairs, Minister of Justice, to the Spiritist Congress that they have authorized and that we have organized there with their support. And I asked to the Ministry of Religion, how do you, Cuban government, why do you sustain Spiritism? And the answer was very clear, and I was surprised myself. You see, we have studied the Spiritist teaching, we have seen Kardec, it's promoting peace, fraternity, and help one to the other, And we, Cuban government, even communist, this is interesting us, and this is why we support you. Isn't it? Voilà. And so you see, we just have to continue with faith, uniting ourselves, and I'm sure one day we will get there as well, in other countries. So to finish, the 3 flags of Spiritism: work, solidarity, and tolerance, inner reform. So this is for every one of us is the key of our own evolution and allowing us to work together. And the flag of Kardec, which is without charity, there is no salvation. Again, not without Spiritism, no salvation. It's without charity, no salvation. So most important is what we do out of the teachings we are trying to spread. Okay. So I thank you for your time and for your attention. It was maybe a little bit long, but now I think we can open for exchanges.
Okay, who wants to start with questions, comments, disagreements?
So when I was in France visiting, I had the impression, it could be completely wrong, that the Spiritism was not so well known there, which to me, because Kardec was from there, that's the crib of Spiritism, I thought. And I'm just saying this because the people that I talk about, they have never heard about. My cousins, none of them that were born there have heard it about. So I just want to know if my impression was right or not, and if it is, why is difficult to spread? I'm asking this because here at Toronto Spiritist Society, we're always thinking about how can we touch the Canadians, because most of the Spiritist groups here still are the Brazilians who live in Canada and who make the groups happen. And we always think it's sometimes a bit hard to reach to the culture. And
So, você vai ter que me ajudar aqui.
Okay.
The first reason is because santo de casa não faz milagre.
Yeah, that's a nice one to translate. I know.
Nul n'est prophète en son pays.
I think there's a saying in English that says what is it?
Nobody is prophet in his own country. Huh?
No, there's another one about, doesn't come.
That's
but
the
everybody
meaning, huh?
understands.
Nobody is a prophet in his own country, or santo de casa não faz milagre. So that's one of the reasons. But so what you tell is right, and not so right, because of course I was also had to go to Brazil to hear the first time about Kardec. I didn't hear about him in France. Nevertheless, his books are existing since 158 years now for the Spirit's book, and have been sold in France in a lot of quantities. And even today, when you look to the statistic of the books, the Spirit's book is selling 3,000 or 4,000 a year in France. So there is much more people knowing Kardec than what we think. Then you have a kind of a cultural specificity. The French guy, he's reading Kardec, but it will take a long time for him then to join a group or to make known around him that he's following Kardec. Why this? Well, it's first a cultural aspect. The people, they prefer to study at home or whatever than to study in group. And the second is because there is a lot of false ideas about Spiritism. Everybody thinks it's a moving table or crystal ball, or what, making this type of confusions. So the people, they are a little bit afraid to talk and to disseminate because of these bad reactions they can face around them. I think this is something which is true not only in France, it's true in several countries, probably also here. Now, when you look what happened in Brazil, so the teaching came quite quickly because you had the first book translation in the 1870s in Portuguese. And then there the Spiritist movement really grew much more than in France. In France you had something like, let's say, 1 million of Spiritists in that epoch. And then you had the First World War and the Second World War where really, and let's say this material comfort and society organization which deviate a little bit the people from this type of spiritual or spiritualist ideas. But in Brazil it was a kind of a continuous growth even at the beginning when it was forbidden. It was forbidden sometimes in Brazil. And even with that, it was growing permanently. And one of the key reasons is because in Brazil, they developed very early charity institution. The Spiritist groups developed some charity actions. And this is really what, as I told before, giving the example. But the people say, okay, this guy may have some crazy ideas, moving tables, but they are doing hospitals, they are helping, giving food to the people, taking lost children and whatever, and doing a good charity work. So this is then helping the people to let's say, it must be a good ideology, and then making them curious to know a little bit more about. So in my opinion, that is one of the key reasons why in Brazil it developed more than in France or wherever in the world. Second aspect is in Brazil you had a lot of immigration, in particular from Africa. And for Africans, the existence of the spirit is obvious, it's part of their culture. So as soon as you bring some rationale behind it, some reasoned thinking, then they do not have the a priori, they do not have these barriers, natural barriers that then the people which are educated Catholic or whatever have, you see. And the third reason is in Europe, in particular, Europe suffered a lot from the domination of the traditional religions, like Inquisition, like religion wars, like this type of things, which made such that the people they are discarding stronger all what is linked to the religion because of this. And there was even some opposite movement in the 19th century through anti-clericalism. Does this exist in English? Anti-clericalism. It's, I mean, the people who were even fighting the clergy.
The clergy.
The clergy,
Yeah.
yes. And even some Masonic movement or whatever, which were really fighting against the religions and to kick them out of the government, to try to restrain their influence in the society and so on. And so you see there were some quite stronger conflicts which gave also some more resistance to the people to accept this new approach. So today it's changing, so it's growing again even in France, and I think it's growing and it will continue to grow also in Canada for some other reasons. You see there I told about this spiritualist shopping. So you have a lot of esoteric fairs and crystals and whatever, and the people who are going there are searching something, they are looking for something. And for instance, in Finland, it's like we started disseminating the Spiritist books and Kardec in such type of events. And surprisingly, there were a lot of people who came then and okay, this is what I was looking for. You see? So these people are now more and more open, understanding that maybe by intuition that there is not only matter in the world, and that these spiritual teachings, these spiritual things, they are looking for them, trying to deepen a little bit more. So I'm sure this is a trend that happens everywhere. Of course, a lot of people will continue making business with those things, but there you will find a lot of serious people. So it's starting again, and in France today you have, I would say something like 25 Spiritist groups which by laws and which are officially existing, and you must have then the same quantity or even more family groups or informal groups that exist. So you have something like between 15 and 100 Spiritist groups. They are not all united. A lot are working alone or isolated and so on. But it's a sign, a clear sign that it's growing again now. When we arrived in France, returning from Brazil in 1990, I was telling it was a spiritual desert in France. The first Spiritist group we found was 700 kilometers from our home. And now you have much more. So it's a clear sign that the trend today is to grow again. And another thing which is helping nowadays in France and which is probably helping here again, we talked about No Solar, about Chico Xavier. And Chico Xavier, there is more and more people loving to read the books in Chico Xavier that we now have in French and that you now have also in English. And that is then coming from outside and then sometimes easier accepted than Kardec. And it will give us a problem because, okay, we have to start from the beginning. To understand Chico, you need to have the basis of Kardec. Otherwise, No Solar can be considered as being something fiction,
yes.
like Avatar or whatever.
Katarina, you have a question?
It's just a comment. I was curious to know that the government in Cuba actually helped the country to develop so many Spiritist centers. I think that's what's missing in Brazil to save the Spiritism and the country. We need a Spiritist party in Brazil. I never thought that the government would be able to actually help the development of Spiritism. That's more of a comment.
Well, in
Maybe
Cuba, there's multiple intentions when they do that, right? So that's not pure.
Just to correct you a little bit, the groups have not been developed by the Cuban government. They have been registered because they existed already. It was a reality in the country, you see. But the Cuban government accepted and then supported them, but they did not create them. These groups were existing in Cuba, in particular in the eastern part of the island. And in Brazil, here again, there was one quote of Bezerra telling, we have to be careful with politics. I think even particular in Brazil. I don't want to interfere.
Everywhere.
It's not my country.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's curious
But
to know that the government somewhere actually supports the Spiritism.
Now you see in the Senate or in the Assembly, in the, how to say, when Dilma was taking the function at the beginning of January, they invited people from the Brazilian Federation and so on. So there is some link, but there is no, how to say,
Not so
But there's no dependencies.
no dependency, no too strong commitment as well, because I think the reasons are quite obvious. And Kardec warned against that, and Bezerra warned against that as well. With politics, nowadays, we have to be careful.
Let me go back to the unification thing.
Yes?
I see that when we focus exclusively on the work, we can do great things. Like we're transmitting live using FAB TV, which used to be TVC, that was started by the ISC. And there's many examples of collaboration that takes place, whether through events, lectures, books, translations, and that really is an exciting part. Sometimes the hardest part is unifying with the groups closest to you, next door, or in the same city. And what we find is that you made a point that unification requires agreement on the basic principles. And I think that's where we stumble a lot, because we tend to have different opinions or different interpretations of what those basic principles are. And there's no shortage, as you were saying, of people who have creative interpretations and provide new ideas that are not necessarily good ideas. How does the ISC work through trying to guide the groups towards this common principles without necessarily having to tell them that that's what they have to do?
It's encouraging. I mean, through what you have seen, for instance. Okay. Stay with Kardec. Stay with those principles, you see. Keep a clear message. It's encouraging, it's not imposing, again. That is the key then, because Kardec is very clearly written. I mean, the translation is always giving then a little bit more difficulty, but the French, the way that Kardec wrote the French language was very, very clear, and he had the skills to write without almost any ambiguity, and with a very clear, using words which have a very clear signification. And that's we have to thank Napoleon in France, because he was, of course, there was a French Revolution, then he was emperor.
The emperor.
Emperor again.
Dictator.
So it was, so a lot of people thought it was going backwards. But he made a lot of things. He made the Code Napoleon, so the laws in France are based on Napoleon, and still today. And he made a reform of the French grammatic and orthograph. And this helped a lot. Why? Because you had a dictionary of the French Academy in 1835, which was valid at the time Kardec wrote. And today, 150 years ago, you can read that almost, it's still very actual. We do not need to rewrite it, as it is the case, for instance, in Germany. The first translation of the Spiritist books are unreadable today, because the language, the orthograph changed so much that we needed to do new translations in order that people can understand. But in the French, we don't have that. So even today, his teachings are very clear and should not give too much freedom for interpretation. If we stick to them, really, the meaning is very, very clear. Now, of course, a lot of people likes to reinvent the world, or reinvent the wheel, or to bring some new things in it. This happens everywhere. I mean, in France, in Brazil, or wherever. And there, we really have to be careful, because it's one of the reason of people or two groups having some problems one towards the other. But if you really stick to Kardec as it's written or advised by Bezerra, it gives you bigger strength to avoid this type of problem.
Okay, any other comments?
I have a question.
Yep.
We had a person here from the Philippines,
Mm-hmm.
and there is a lot of people from Philippines following us in our Facebook page, and I did some Google research, of course,
Mm-hmm.
to see what they have there, and it seems that they have a lot of Spiritist teachings there.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What is that exactly? Are they part of the Spirit community as well?
Alors, we don't know exactly.
Okay.
We have to go there and to see. But we have already some contacts with some people from Philippines, which are really very almost Spiritists. But it's a minority as far as we understood so far. Because the other ones, they are somehow telling that they are Spiritists, they are even telling about Kardec. But then when you do what they say, what they do, it's quite different.
Nice.
So we really have to go there and to see and try to understand better. So it's really good that you mentioned that. It's one of the goals that we have. Philippines is of course a little bit far away, but we will get there one day, Jean-Paul or whoever, in order to try to understand better what's happening there. But what we are already sure is that there are some groups which are quite following quite with a big fidelity the Kardec teachings. And also it's maybe a second Cuba. Cuba we discovered 15 years ago that there is so many Spiritism there because the country was... And in Philippines maybe we will find, we will have another good surprise to having much more Spiritists in Philippines than what we initially thought. At least we hope so.
She comes here and then she goes back to the Philippines.
Mhm.
I think her son is here with her grandchildren. But every time that she's in Canada, sometimes she stays here 3-4 months, she comes here for the studies. And she's a very avid,
Note taker.
student.
Mhm.
It can be that much snow, she's here. She's a small lady, but she comes, and she just wants to learn a lot. Sometimes she buys books, she takes books back there, and she gives to people. But some of the things that she tells me, it's not
Mm.
exactly Spiritism as we
Sure.
understand it.
But I mean, this is natural. You cannot ask the people to have a clear understanding if we don't go there to help them to understand.
Exactly.
You know, it's a little bit our mission to go there and to again to propose them the teachings. Then it's up to them to accept it or not, or to continue with the things that are a little bit deviating or not. So it will be their freedom. But we need at least to go there and to propose them the right things. So we have in the International Spiritist Council, we came here with Jean-Paul from the French-speaking Spiritist movement, which is a coordination within the Spiritist within the council for the French-speaking countries. So Jean-Paul, he talked about it yesterday. There are about 1 billion people, French-speaking people around the world, and you have a lot in Africa. And we have a huge work to support also in Africa, where you have also a lot of people which have beliefs which is close to this. And for Philippines, we are trying to do the same through an English-speaking coordination, maybe US or Canada or UK, Ireland, or that could then help us to go there and to try to understand better and how we can help them and bring them these teachings and see how we can, let's say, develop the Spiritism as per Allan Kardec in Philippines, because I'm sure there we will have some good surprises.
Well, it's interesting. If you focus, if we only had the 5 books from Kardec, we will learn, and we can learn all of the principles, all of the basic lessons. But a lot of what we call the practice of Spiritism has actually been complemented by a lot of the work by Chico Xavier with André Luiz. And unfortunately, these books have much fewer translation languages than Kardec books. So it's not surprising that countries like Cuba, Philippines, they take the basic books, and probably just the Spiritist books and Mediums book, because those are the 2 that folks tends to read more, and they try to reach those principles, those ideas, but then they create the practice on their own. And they bring in a lot of their cultural heritage, their own religious beliefs from before, and in some ways it shapes how they practice. And for us then, who come in and look at it, we sometimes don't even recognize that necessarily as Spiritism. But they learn the basic principles, the basic ideas through the books of Kardec.
The first time International Spiritist Council, it was Nestor Mazzotti, went to Mexico. He was also a little bit surprised, not to tell afraid, about what they were doing in the groups there. There were a lot of statues and a lot of things around. And then, okay, what do? You go and try to explain to the people, and you are sure that's really efficient, you really need that, and it needs a lot of diplomacy, you know. Yeah. And then, you see, next year you come, you see it reduced, and it's a continuous improvement work, and we cannot come and impose. We just bring the teachings, call them to their own reflection, and then they make the decisions. Of course, a lot will stay with that, but some will then come to a better practice.
Okay, questions? Well, one more time I'd like to thank Charles and Jean-Paul for coming here. Before we go, Thiago has a surprise for us that he, I believe, created a poem for the event today. So I invite Thiago to come up here and recite the poem for us, and then we'll finish off.
Well, maybe this is a challenge because I am usually protected by my guitar all the time, and I'm putting the guards down a little bit. And it is in honor to the Spiritist Day, today, April 18, and didn't have a name, so then we can just say celebrating Spiritism. On April 18, 1857, the light has been brought by the Spirit of Truth materializing the voices of heaven in words that were given to enlighten and to soothe. Elevated were the talks with the teacher from Lyon about God, the creation, and survival of the soul, from being very simple and ignorant at first, but having endless happiness and the purity as a goal. Through successive existences, the spirits will progress in the many indwelling places and the bodies that they dress, in developing morality, intelligence, free will, through the tests and the missions that the spirits will fulfill, through the loving and forgiving, living in us the divine, having Jesus as the model, and being branches in God's vine. Let's pray for God our Father and the spirits high above, so the good news we may live in His justice, peace, and love. Thank you.
Thiago, sometimes I forget how you always brings these great surprises. Thank you very much. Very creative and very beautiful. So we're just about finished. I will kind of ask for indulgence from Charles, if he could come here and do a final prayer to close what was a wonderful evening.
In French?
In whatever of the 12 languages you speak.
Or maybe Portuguese?
Yes.
Because in English it would be difficult for me. Então, vamos elevar os nossos pensamentos para Deus, nosso Pai, inteligência suprema, causa primeira de todas as coisas. E também para Jesus, divino mensageiro, que é modelo para cada um de nós, que nos enviam permanentemente na espiritualidade, mentores, espíritos de luz, que estão aqui para ajudar cada um de nós como guia espiritual, para ajudar também as instituições, as organizações, e no sentido da disseminação dessa doutrina consoladora pelo mundo e nessas terras aqui do Canadá. Ajudai-nos a manter elevado o nosso pensamento, as nossas vibrações, para que possamos melhor perceber e receber a inspiração deles nesse trabalho a que nos propomos nessa encarnação. Que possamos ficar fiéis a eles, mantendo a vigilância necessária para não cairmos também nas inspirações contrárias ou para cairmos nas armadilhas que não faltam, os escolhos no nosso caminho que poderiam atrasar a obra. Que esses ensinamentos possam entrar no nosso nos nossos corações, que possamos assim continuar a nossa reforma íntima, avançando no percurso evolutivo e ajudar todos os nossos irmãos a realizar o mesmo. Abençoe o trabalho desta casa, essa missão junto ao povo desse país, para trazer consolo, para responder, levar as informações àquelas pessoas que procuram informações, dar a essas pessoas também os recursos que necessitam para enfrentar as provas das suas vidas. Que assim seja.
Thank you, Charles. And just to remind everyone that Charles and Jean-Paul and everyone here will be back tomorrow at 11 for a lecture on Kardec. I hope to see everyone. But before you go, There is the mandatory picture, and then we have cake and sweets. But before you have the cake, you gotta have the sweets. I would like also to thank everyone who's watched us through the TV, Feb TV. It's always a pleasure to have you, and wish you were here personally, but this is the next best thing. I wish you all peace and a wonderful Spiritist day.